Sunday, the 30th of July 2023. In this news flash, I'm going to talk about that meeting between Putin and Lukashenko. Now, before I start the discussion, I need you to take into consideration that the Wagner grouping that was in the Donbass, most of them are now in Belarus. And they are making the Polish people and the Lithuanian people very nervous. Listen to this. Lukashenko at a meeting with Putin. Wagnerites began to strain us. They want to go to the West on an excursion. And look at Putin's face when Lukashenko tells him that. And look at his reaction. You need to take note of that. And now I'm going to play you a small video clip of that little interlude. Watch Putin's face.
Нас начали напрягать вагнеровцы. Просятся на Запад, разрешите нам. Я говорю, вам зачем на Запад туда? Ну, и втихую мы же контролируем, что происходит.
Now, my first impression is Putin is actually amused by this. But let's get some perspective. And those that follow my channel know that I have made skidmarks about that Wagner, let's call it, uprising. Here are the facts. The simple fact is this. After the Donbass was brought into Russia and part of the Russian Federation today, the Wagner grouping in the Donbass became a major problem for Putin for the simple reason that the Russian constitution forbids the PMCs to be active on Russian soil. The Donbass is now Russian soil. So Wagner was there illegally, and they had to handle that. Shoigu tried to bypass that problem by getting the Wagnerites to sign contracts with the Russian army. But that contract signing created a bit of a friction in Wagner because Prigozhin felt like the Russian military was trying to hijack his men. The other problem was, it is generally known that the Poles are busy cruising for a bruising, and they are pushing forces onto the border area between Poland and Belarus. So the Russians were in the position that they needed to strengthen the Belarusian hand, but they were careful not to create a political fiasco. So Russia could not just simply send 100,000 people into Belarus. So what did they do? They played that Wagner uprising perfectly. They bamboozled the West completely. Up to today, there are so-called intelligent analysts that still fails to see what the fuck actually happened there. So there was that ruse of this uprising, and in jumps Lukashenko, and he solves the problem for Putin. And what is part of the solution? The Wagnerized Wagner was banished, let's call it banished, to Belarus. So Prigozhin and all these people into Belarus, and everybody looked at it and say, yeah, that was a clever solution. Meantime, it wasn't a solution, it was a fucking plan. So now we've got the Wagnerites in Poland, in Belarus, and they are there on the border area of Poland and Lithuania. And remember this, make note of it. The Kowalski corridor between Belarus and Kaliningrad is severely important to Russia. Now there's already been rumors that the Wagnerites may move into that corridor. And then Lukashenko says this to Putin: the Wagnerites wants to go on an excursion to the West. They just want to go and solve the problems there. And the media made a big story of how Prigozhin is now being basically ostracized by Putin and by Russia and all that cock. There was lots of stories. And then we've got this African meeting, African leaders and Russian meeting in St. Petersburg. And what do you know? Look at this. Prigozhin continues to connect with African representatives at the summit. Wow! Now let me tell you one simple fact. There was no way that Prigozhin could be at that summit without Putin's blessing. But what is Prigozhin doing there with the African leaders? I'm going to take you back to another Skidmark that I did, in which I said BRICS was fired up as a trading solution for the non-West. And it is overwhelmingly supported by the West. Then they came with the BRICS Bank, which is a counterweight for the IMF and the World Bank. And in that same Skidmark I said, I will not be surprised if BRICS as such evolves into the counterweight for the United Nations, because the United Nations is captured, it's fraught. That the whole operation with all its affiliates, World Health Organization, Human Rights, everything has been captured by the Americans. And those organizations make decisions and enforce it on the world that the Americans want. And I said in that same Skidmark, don't be surprised if the BRICS bloc does not feel the need to have some form of counter for the United Nations so-called peacekeepers. And look at this with Prigozhin there in St. Petersburg. What is he doing there? And that whole thing around the Wagner operation and the PMCs, all of that is busy. Russia is busy restructuring that whole PMC setup. But Wagner is already active in Africa. So, what is the counter going to be for the United Nations peacekeepers? It's going to be this Wagner force. They will operate as the military arm of BRICS. But the difference is they're not going to be peacekeepers. They're not going to be a peacekeeping force. They are going to be a get the fuck out of our country's force. Mark my words. Please give me a like, and subscribe and share the thing. Thank you for your support.